Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spotlight on CS Ops, where we really dive deep into people who are working in customer success operations. I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Lin. Hi, Matthew.
Oh, Jean?
And today we have the pleasure of talking to Sonam Dabholkar. Sonam previously worked at Gainsight. She worked at Autodesk, Gong, and has recently moved to Clio, actually just in my neighborhood almost. So really excited to have you here, Sonam. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, John and Matthew, for having me.
Um, to hear that list of places that you worked, that you've got to flex your CS ops talent, there was a murderer's row, using a baseball analogy. That might be it. You'd say Autodesk, Gone, Clea. So tell us like how you came to some of those places. Like what was your journey into CS ops?
Yeah, so I think my journey into CS Ops actually just started with my journey into customer success. I started my career actually at PwC in change management consulting, and little did I know that that experience would actually give me the skills that would really translate well into a customer facing function and ultimately customer success career path. So I had joined Gainsight as an early employee. I think I was like employee 100 and 117, and joined in the very early days back in 2014, in more of like a sales role, and ultimately kind of like did that for a year, really was hungry to be a people manager. And it was a combination of just timing and opportunity and hard work that led me to becoming a people manager on the growing customer success team. They had just kind of segmented out their customer success team. We're starting to segment the customer base, and they were like, "Hey, we need a manager for the SMB customer success team. You're interested in being a people manager? Do you want to like hire our initial CSMs and start to develop the workflows and the customer journey for our SMB segment, and see if you want to try like a career path in customer success?" And being that Gainsight was at that time like a customer success focused company, customer success platform, I was like, yeah, this is the place to do it and really see if I want a career in customer success. And so I ended up building and leading that SMB customer success team for 3 years, and really loved it. Really enjoyed my time there, and then felt like I enjoyed the part of my role that was more operational, more than the actual like CSMing part of my role. And it took me a while to realize that I really like was building out the team, hiring people, really creating this team culture, and really just figuring out like our health scores, our risk processes, measuring churn and retention, creating dashboards for my team, experimenting with a pooled model, stuff that like if you had an ops business partner, they would be kind of like helping you with as a CS leader. And so I realized like, oh, that those activities that I'm doing are actually really fun for me and are giving me energy. I want to turn this into a full-time job. And by the way, there was like a career path now for CS operations, having been, another thing that I think Gainsight helped propel as a career path. And so then it kind of clicked for me like, wait, I want to be in CS operations. And then that's what led me to Autodesk. That was a really interesting role, my first official role in CS operations. They had just moved from a perpetual license model to a subscription-based business model. And so they were really like trying to bring thought leaders in the customer success space to their company, and really starting to operationalize a lot of like what the CS methodologies and motions would look like. They actually, at that time, were just starting to implement Gainsight. So it was funny because I went from being a Gainsight employee to like a Gainsight customer immediately. And so that was a really fun experience, just getting to be in CS ops at a global scale at an already public company. That was almost like a little bit early on the maturity curve of like evolving their customer success motion. Um, and then, what led me to Gong was getting the ability to build and lead a CS ops team from scratch. So I joined Gong very early as well. They were around 200 employees, and they were looking for like the CS ops leader to really just like create, operational processes and build a team, and really support the CS org as they were really kind of growing and starting to figure out customer journey, segmentation, like all those initial strategic questions and projects where you really need an ops thought partner to work with like your VP of CS and your CS leaders. And so I was like super hungry for some more responsibility and wanted to like build and lead a team, and loved just like early days at Gainsight. And so Gong early days, like I wanted to kind of feel that same like startup mentality. And so that's how I ended up at Gong and was there for 4.5 years. So saw a ton of like growth, a ton of change. We went through periods of hyper growth in that time. The CS org went from a small team of CSMs and support reps to this like 200 plus multi-function, like very kind of mature post-sales motion, and was able to grow a team of, at its largest, it was 13 folks on my team. So that was really fun for me to just like, truly like own building and scaling a CS ops team. And now I'm at Clio. So it's been about 2 months. And for me, Clio is really interesting because we are, a big company. We're around 1,100 employees. There is already a pretty mature RevOps function. I'm coming into an existing CS ops team and leading that team here. And where Clio is really like on this multi-product customer journey. We already have products that we've launched to customers, and there's a lot of strategy behind figuring out like the multi-product customer experience and whether like our existing tools, processes, the foundations, and the infrastructure are going to scale to this like next level of complexity. So for me, joining Clio was really about like just like creating that experience for me where I could just be challenged at the next level in CS operations and take what I learned in my previous roles and really apply those learnings here.
That's a really, really cool history. And so I started in CS Ops about 10 years ago, and you were actually my first CSM,
I remember.
helping me to implement Gainsight. And so known you for a minute, I guess. And your transition from being a CSM, teaching folks like me or telling us about best practices makes complete sense. You went from like, maybe telling people and here's what you should do to now just directly owning it. Can you walk us through like how do you approach building a customer success ops team? Like where do you start? Like you've incubated a bunch of teams and you've grown the 1 to 14 or so. How do you approach that in the companies that you've been working with?
Yeah, I think for me, when I did this at Gong, it was really important for me to have the buy-in of the person that hired me, which was our CCO at the time. And I got really lucky in the sense that like he was already completely bought into the vision of a CS ops team. And he basically looked to me to be like, okay, what roles do you need and when? And just we needed to pace them out in a way that made sense to like in accordance with how the CS org was scaling. And so for me, like when I joined, we had already known that we were going to implement a CS tool. And so my first hire was someone that could be a Gainsight admin, because having worked at Gainsight and having implemented Gainsight before, I knew that that was like the gap that I needed to fill of like, okay, I need someone that can really like create a successful Gainsight implementation, and someone that can also like do more than that, like also be, an ops business partner for the organization. But we were getting, the whole CSM org onto Gainsight at that time. And so that was kind of my first priority. And then, typically I'll just kind of like assess the needs like every quarter and the gaps almost like once like you're able to like really embed yourself in the CS business, you can kind of start to see those gaps of like operational needs that pop up where maybe someone on the team can fill that need for a little bit, but it grows into a full-time role on its own. And then you just have to prove like the business case for, okay, here is why this is a full-time role. Here's how much time this person on my team is spending on this. This is it taking away from these other activities. And so this is what like a full-time role would look like. And then figure out, is there headcount? If not, like, make those trade-offs of like, should we hire for this role now or later? And what's the impact to the business of waiting? And over like my 4.5 years at Gong, I was able to do that at points where it was very clear what the next role would be. So like the Gainsight admin role was first. Next, it was more like program manager type roles. So folks on my team that could run initiatives across the CS org and almost just take like a really ambiguous business challenge and just like operationalize it, create a process around it, measure it, deploy it to the team. And then over time, we had like data and analytics needs, we had CSM territory management needs. we built a new professional services function. So I needed professional services operations. We grew our support team. So I needed someone dedicated to support operations. So really just like mapping those needs out and aligning with the customer success leaders to make sure I'm hiring as much as I can ahead of those needs was something that I tried to focus on every quarter. And then that eventually just kind of ballooned into this like 13-person team.
I was all prepared to ask a question that I think you just answered, which was like how, given the organizations you worked at, especially the Gong experience, because I think it's the one where you came in as number one, if you will, there in CS ops and grew up. Like, how do you build that roadmap? And given all of the stakeholders that you've got to balance and the uncertainty maybe that's ahead in the business, I mean, maybe you all knew that Gong was going to grow as fast as it did, but maybe it didn't. So, how did you go about building that roadmap and socializing it with all of your stakeholders?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question because in my time at Gong, I joined September 2019. I was in the office for 6 months. Then it was pandemic and we didn't have an office for like 2.5 years and everyone was remote. And for that early time in 2020 during the pandemic, like a lot of businesses were struggling. A lot of customers of ours were like going out of business, like companies in certain industries were not doing well because of that like uncertainty that was happening around right when the pandemic hit. Um, and companies were going remote and needing to figure out like, hey, what are our sales teams doing? What are our customer success teams doing? Who's saying what to prospects and customers? And so initially it was like scary because like the whole world was like feeling very uncertain, but then things started to pick back up because the use case for Gong became very strong in a remote
Strong, yeah.
world. Um, and so our roadmap had to adjust because we were in unprecedented times, as we all know. So, initially what I thought my first year at Gong would be turned out to be completely different. I actually wasn't able to hire anyone in CS Ops outside of my first Gainsight admin hire until like the following year, so like a whole year later. And that was because, we just didn't know what things would look like. And so, I also ended up taking on a few folks from other functions. Like I kind of incubated this like initial training team, this initial implementation team, and those teams grew to be like our official professional services and education teams. But because we were just like, we don't know what is going on in the world, we need to be very cautious with how we like hire. Um, I ended up kind of wearing three hats. I was operations, I was implementation, I was training for like a year and a half until we were able to go back to like business as usual. So in that time, I had to think about how to best utilize like our operational resources time because, I had basically myself and one other person in operations. Then I also had to dedicate some time to implementation and some time to training. And those are more like customer facing motions. So the roadmap had to change because of that. And then once I was able to hire, it picked up speed really quickly. And I was able to really kind of sync with the CS leaders on what their roadmaps look like. We, identified functions we wanted to create within the post-sales organization. So then I backed into, okay, here's when I'm going to hire certain roles. But like things just have to be very agile. I think in operations, you can't be very set on your roadmap because business priorities change. You start the year with your company plan, and then I feel like in the middle of the year, you always just have like a replan almost of like new things that come up, different strategic direction that you're taking. And so I think as ops, you have to be very agile to the needs of the business and make sure that you have those connection points where you're meeting with, your CCO, you're meeting with your VP of CS, all the other post-sales leaders so that you get a sense for how they're thinking about like their next quarter and their next 6 months. And then you can kind of align your roadmap to that and then always be don't get too attached to it because you have to know that things are going to change in an operations world.
You touched on it a little bit. You have to be a kind of a Swiss Army knife, right? As these things change, one
Yeah.
minute you're analyzing data, the next minute you're figuring out systems, the next minute you're doing, processes or driving out programs. So, is there anything that you've done that you think has helped you get like this sort of massive tool belt of things, so that whenever you're thrown whatever various punches from different directions, you're able to kind of handle it and just go with it? Is there anything that you've done in terms of training or learning that has helped you with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I probably have an unpopular answer where I learn best by just doing. So if someone is like, "Hey, we have this business problem, we need help with this," and if it's something I've never done, I'll just try to like do a ton of discovery. I'll ask people a lot of questions. If there's documentation out there, I'll read it. I'll Google for things. I'll talk to like peers in the industry. I'll just try to like understand as much as possible. And I feel like I personally just learn best by like doing something and then getting feedback on that thing as I'm doing it. Um, and I think also this just goes back to like my philosophy for hiring folks in CS ops. I think when you have a really small CS ops team, you end up with a few people that are doing all of the things in ops. So data and analytics, business systems management, program management, being an operational business partner, like things that it's really hard to be very good at all of those things and to go deep in all of those things at the same time within one role. And so if you're like the first CS ops person at a company, which I was for a little bit of time at Gong, it's hard to be stretched in all those different directions and be good at all those things. And so I was lucky because I was told like, hey, I could hire a team. And then I made sure the way I hired the team was complementary to my own skill set. So I'm not someone that is great at being like a systems admin. And like I don't think I could have implemented Gainsight by myself. And so that's why I was like, okay, we're going to implement Gainsight. I know that's going to happen in the next 6 months. My first hire should be someone who is very technical and who has done this before. Um, and so I think it's important to also just know what gives you energy, what doesn't give you energy, what you're good at, what you're not good at. And then if you're building a team, build a team that has complementary skill sets and strengths because they can then kind of lean on each other for those things. And then that's ultimately what I did is I hired folks that had these like very distinct specialties versus people that were more generalists across like all the different operational areas.
There's a
Makes sense.
theme. There's a theme in here. Um, you just referenced it. Like I knew what gave me energy, and it wasn't necessarily Gainsight administration, which is ironic given that you used to work at the mothership, right? And then also when you were at Gainsight, you're like describing the things that gave you joy, which
Yeah.
were not necessarily the customer success itself, but a lot of the operations that's surrounding it. So you would make a career. But what are the hallmarks? What are the things you look for? Like if someone's listening, like I'm having difficulty finding my passion, or I'm maybe listless and wandering around. Like, what are the things that you would recommend, or what are the things that sort of let you know this is the direction I should go head?
Yeah. I've done a number of things to figure that out. And I don't think it's like one light bulb moment in your career and you figure out your whole career path for the next like 30 years. I think it's a each chapter in your career, you kind of have to go through like that period of reflection of like, okay, what's next? Am I on the career path that I want to be on? And like for me, I went from basically consulting at like a big four company to being in a customer facing function, customer success, to now CS ops. So those were kind of like my three big chapters. And each time before entering like the next chapter, I've had to like pause and really reflect. And it's taken me like months sometimes to figure out like, what is the thing? Like it's like on the tip of my tongue, but like, what is like the next job that I want? And sometimes it's inner reflection, sometimes it's talking to like a career coach, or even just like talking to friends you have in the industry or mentors, and then getting some of like that outside perspective. But that's usually what has guided me to like the next job that I start, or then if it's a career path change, like what that means. But I think there's no easy way to get around it. It just takes time and really having a good self-awareness of like activities you're doing that drain you and activities you're doing day to day that fill your cup, and just starting to like take note of those things and recognize patterns over time.
The
Agile career
I
development. I hear it coming. I hear that as another topic to explore. Go
Right.
ahead,
And
John.
it's also like I was gonna say as well, like you lean on the people in CS, and thankfully CS people are always amazing to talk to and so compassionate, empathetic. So it's an easy field to like contact people and say, hey, what's up? Can you help me with this? Um, the and you sorry, Matthew, you wanted to jump into career development a little bit, but we can jump into that a little bit more. Or I was gonna ask you, like what would you wished you would have known now that you've gone through those chapters, some of the things that you've learned a ton along the way. Is there anything that you wish you would have known when you were looking at the start of your career in this field?
Yeah, I think that early on, when I was just starting out in consulting, the reason I went into consulting is because I didn't know what to do. And I felt a lot of pressure in college to have like my career path figured out. Like people are in pre-med and they're going to go to med school, or like pre-law, they go to law school, or like everyone just kind of felt like they had their next step figured out. And for me, I was in an undergraduate business program. And you go into accounting, banking, or consulting. And for me, consulting felt the most general. And I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what my dream job is. And so consulting will get me the most exposure to different types of work and how like businesses and corporations operate, so that I can then figure that out. And I feel like I wish that someone had told me, like, sometimes you're just not going to have that answer of like, what is my dream job? Because that answer for me has changed over the last, like, 13 years of my career. Like, it changed when I was in consulting, it changed when I was in customer success, it changed now that I'm in CS ops. And I don't expect, like, you know, it will continue to stay the same. I think it's just an evolution of, like, as you learn more things, you get more skill sets, like your interests change, your energy changes, your priorities change. So I think I would have appreciated someone just telling me, like, it's okay to not have everything figured out at the age of 22.
That's really good.
Yeah, I like that input. It's okay not to know. It's okay not to know. It's okay to experiment
There
a
is
little bit.
comfort in the uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me this. Go back to CS ops just a little bit. Do you have a model, a framework, or even just some thoughts about like how you determine the maturity of a CS ops program? Like if you arrive at Gong and you're employee number one, maybe the maturity is zero because you were there to start it.
Yeah.
Or do you think about like, okay, these are almost like we talk about customer lifecycle all the time. Do you think about CS ops lifecycle? Like, I want to go take the team from here to here. How do you think about those sorts of things? It's sort of CS ops maturity.
Yeah, that is so fascinating, because I think that is probably like an asset that is missing in our industry, is like how to rate the maturity of your CS ops team. And there's a lot out there around like customer success, organizational maturity. And some of the frameworks I've seen are like you move from reactive to proactive to like prescriptive to now like, predictive, like using AI to like inform your customer success motions. And I think that I wouldn't want to create a CS ops framework that is like super different from that, because I think we are like operations business partners for the like customer facing teams. And like, ultimately like the whole go-to-market motion has to flow seamlessly. So the way that I think about it, and the way that at least it's played out in my life, is the CS ops team's maturity more or less kind of aligns to like the CS org's maturity. Like if you have kind of a CS org that is really lean, more reactive, just starting out, like typically like when you're trying to move to more of a proactive motion, that's when they start looking for their first ops person, because they need someone that isn't like the VP of CS or the CS leader to build operations. They need someone that's like thinking about those things proactively as part of their job, and is a bit more like operational and can build a system and design processes and experiment and measure how those are going. So that's typically how, if I was to design this, like that's how I would start, is like looking at kind of like those customer success organizational like maturity frameworks, and then layering in like, okay, when do you like build a CS ops team against this? And like, what are those skills that you would need at each of these phases? And then when you want to become this like predictive, like transformative CS org that's like at the height of its maturity, what is that? What does that look like to have a CS ops team that is supporting an organization like that? Like, what are the skills you need? How many people do you need? Depending on what that business model looks like. So that's how I would think about it.
I love it. It makes a lot of sense, and I think about a lot of those things in the same way. Based on your experience, like, is there anything that you would predict for the future? Like, maybe it's a maturity assessment or some more structure in CS ops. But what do you think is going to happen to CS ops over the next 5 to 10 years?
I hope it continues to be a career path, because I really like it and I would like to stay in CS ops. So selfishly, I'm like, I think it'll still be relevant. I do think though, I mean, with with AI, there is definitely going to be a point at which we have to figure out how we in CS ops embrace AI more so in our workflows and use it to just, optimize our customer motions and how we work with CSM teams. I don't know. I think that everyone has a lot of ideas. I haven't seen something that's like super transformative that changes the way that like CS ops does things today. I think we're all still like figuring it out, but I think that's going to happen as a forcing function of just AI becoming more prevalent over the next few years. And then I think also with CS ops, I don't think CS ops should work in a silo. I think with like sales and CS ops, I've started to see like rev ops functions get created. And I think because the customer experience is cohesive across sales and CS, and a lot of selling happens in CS, it's not just like pre-sales versus post-sales anymore. I think there's going to be a push to think about that whole customer journey more holistically and not have like separate silos for like sales ops and CS ops.
Very
I
cool.
like that prediction.
Well, yeah, I do too. I hope it stays a career because if nothing else, maybe it's not called CS, I don't know, whatever, but it's definitely there's an ops role that's helping customer facing teams. So, um, but yeah, absolutely love it. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has absolutely been wonderful to reconnect a little bit, but also hear your story and all the great successes that you've had. So, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff. The 30 minutes flew by. I could talk about this for hours. So thanks so much for having me.